It was the kind of trip people dream about, quiet, remote, and away from the chaos of the city. The plan was simple. 4 close friends would escape to a hidden beach for a weekend, leaving behind phones, noise, and responsibilities. The group, Nathan, Julia, Mark, and Sam, had been craving peace, something untouched and forgotten by tourists. One evening, while scrolling through a strange old forum filled with travel secrets, Nathan stumbled upon a post titled, "The Beach with No Name." There were no pictures, just a single pin on a satellite map and a chilling line of text beneath it. No crowd, no rules, but don't stay after midnight. It sounded like one of those internet myths, too ridiculous to be true, and of course, that only made it more tempting. They were all in by the next morning. After gathering supplies, they took off in Sam's old van, following the map into the unknown. The road narrowed into dirt, surrounded by tall trees and heavy silence. For miles, there were no houses, no signs, not even a proper path, just the occasional crunch of tires over dried leaves. When the forest finally opened up, the view took their breath away. It was a beach that didn't belong to the world anymore. Soft, white sand stretched far, kissed by a sea that looked too blue to be real. There were no lifeguard towers, no sun umbrellas, no buildings, nothing but nature and silence. The sun was already high, warm on their backs as they ran toward the water, like kids seeing the ocean for the first time. They pitched their tents under a crooked palm tree and set up a small fire pit. Laughter filled the air, mixing with the sound of waves. The first day felt perfect. They swam, played music, cooked over fire, and told stories until the sun disappeared behind the sea. As the sky turned dark, the stars lit up like something out of a painting. Nathan, lying on the sand and staring at the sky, thought to himself that this place felt untouched by time. That night, while the others slept, Nathan stayed up, letting the sound of waves lull him into peace. But just before he turned in, something strange caught his attention. There was a sudden hush. No crickets, no breeze, just the soft, endless sound of water, and a distant dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the sand. It was faint, barely there, and maybe even imagined. He looked around, but nothing moved, and the beach looked just as empty as before. He shook it off as the wind, or maybe a crab wandering too close to the tents. Still, as he zipped himself into the sleeping bag, he felt a cold whisper of doubt settle in his chest. Something about this place, beneath its beauty and silence, felt off. But tired and unwilling to scare the others, he said nothing. Morning would come soon enough, or so he thought. The next morning, the beach seemed perfectly normal again. The sun was out, warm and bright, and the sound of the waves was as calming as ever. After a quick breakfast, the group of friends decided to take a walk along the shoreline. The sand was soft beneath their feet, and the breeze was gentle, carrying the salty scent of the ocean. As they wandered, laughing and joking, Mark, who had a habit of wandering off, stopped suddenly. He stared down at the sand, his brow furrowing. Nathan, Julia, and Sam looked at him, wondering what had caught his attention. Mark pointed ahead. "Look," he said, his voice low. At first, no one understood what he meant, but then they saw it, a set of footprints in the sand. They weren't there the day before, at least no one had noticed them. These footprints were large, way too big to belong to any of them. Mark crouched down, examining them carefully. The toes were oddly shaped, and the heel was deeper than the rest of the print, like something heavy had been walking here. The strangest part? The tracks started in the middle of the beach, not from the forest or the water, and they led straight into the ocean. No prints came from the water, and no prints went back toward the trees or their camp. It was as if something, or someone, had appeared in the middle of the beach, walked a few steps, and then disappeared into the water without a trace. Julia, always the skeptic, laughed it off. "It's probably someone who came out here late last night." She pointed to the forest. "Maybe a camper or hiker. No big deal." But Nathan didn't feel convinced. There was something wrong about the footprints. They didn't seem natural. He couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't from a person at all. As they continued their walk, the eerie sensation stuck with him, though he tried to ignore it. By the time they made their way back to camp, it was almost lunchtime, and the weirdness of the footprints had started to fade from their minds. But then, as the day wore on and the sun began to set, an uncomfortable stillness settled over the beach. The usual sounds of birds and wind had quieted down, leaving an eerie silence. Even the waves seemed to be crashing more softly than before. That night, when the friends gathered around their fire, the quiet feeling didn't go away. Julia joked about the footprints again, but Nathan couldn't shake the image of them from his mind. He tried to push it aside, telling himself it was nothing. But the dragging sound from the night before returned. It started faintly, barely noticeable, like the shuffle of something across the sand. Nathan listened, his heart starting to race. The others were talking, oblivious to the sound, but he couldn't ignore it. He kept hearing it, moving closer, dragging across the beach as if something, or someone, was coming nearer. He tried to tell himself it was just the wind, but deep down he knew something was wrong. Something was out there, just beyond the firelight, watching them. The next evening, the strange feeling that had settled over the group grew even stronger. As night approached, the air grew cooler and the sky darkened quickly. The friends had decided to explore the far end of the beach, a section they hadn't ventured to yet. They wanted to see the rocks that marked the edge of the shore, towering high and jagged, bathed in the glow of the setting sun. The walk was peaceful at first, the sound of their feet on the soft sand accompanying the rhythmic crashing of the waves. But as they neared the rocks, Julia stopped abruptly. She pointed toward a spot near the cliffs. "Look," she whispered. The others followed her gaze and froze. There, standing by the rocks, was a figure, a girl, pale, with long, dark hair that blew gently in the wind. She was dressed in a long white dress that fluttered against the breeze. The way she stood, still and silent, felt wrong, like something that didn't belong. The figure was staring out at the ocean, not moving at all. For a moment, no one spoke. It felt like time itself had stopped. Mark, who was always the brave one, stepped forward. "Hey, are you okay?" he called out. His voice cracked slightly as if unsure of what he was seeing. But there was no response. The girl didn't even turn her head. She simply remained where she stood, staring out at the water. The moment stretched, thick and uncomfortable, before Nathan took a step forward too, his curiosity overcoming his fear. "Maybe she's lost," he said, but his voice sounded unsure. He was already walking toward her, as if drawn by an invisible force. The others hesitated, looking at one another nervously. They could feel the tension in the air, but none of them could explain it. The closer Mark got to the girl, the more the air seemed to chill, and a sense of unease swept over him. Just a few steps from her, he called again, "Hey, are you okay?" But as his voice echoed across the beach, the girl suddenly vanished. No movement, no sound. She wasn't there. 1 second, she was standing by the rocks, and the next, she had disappeared without a trace. Mark spun around, his heart racing. "Where did she go?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The others rushed toward him, but the beach was empty. The sand was untouched, the water calm, but there was no sign of the girl. No footprints, no rustle in the trees, nothing. They all stared at the spot where she had been, confused and terrified. Had they all imagined it? Was she even real? They couldn't explain what had happened, but the air felt thicker now, like something unseen was watching them. The rest of the evening was spent in uneasy silence. No one spoke much, and the strange feeling only grew stronger. The fire crackled in the distance, but every now and then a faint sound, a whisper perhaps, would drift in from the beach. A noise that wasn't quite the wind, but something else. Something that didn't belong, oh Minnie. By the time the fourth day arrived, the group felt more unsettled than ever. The events of the previous night had left a dark cloud hanging over them. They couldn't stop thinking about the girl, her sudden disappearance, her pale face, and the eerie silence she left behind. Nathan had tried to convince himself it was nothing but a trick of the light, a figment of their imagination. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. The beach wasn't just deserted, it felt haunted. That afternoon, they decided to pack up and leave. The sense of unease was becoming unbearable. They figured a hike into the nearby forest might help, shake off the strange events. But as they ventured deeper into the trees, they found themselves lost. The dense forest seemed to twist around them, paths disappearing into thick underbrush. It was as if the trees were closing in, blocking any sense of direction. The sun, once bright, had now turned a dull orange, and the air felt thick and heavy. By the time they realized how far off course they were, the sky was dimming. Panic set in. They tried to retrace their steps, but it was no use. The more they walked, the deeper they seemed to go into the woods. It felt like the forest itself had swallowed them whole. Mark's voice trembled as he tried to maintain his usual bravado. "We'll find our way back," he said, but his tone lacked its usual confidence. "Just stick together. We're fine." But none of them felt fine. The trees seemed to loom taller, their shadows longer as the day turned to dusk. The further they ventured, the less familiar everything seemed. Strange noises echoed around them. The rustle of something just out of sight, the snap of a twig underfoot. They tried calling out, but their voices seemed to vanish into the thick woods. At one point, Sam thought he saw something move behind, a tree. But when he turned to look, there was nothing. Julia, once the most skeptical, was now pale and jittery. "We're not alone here," she muttered, her voice barely audible. It was clear the group was feeling the same mounting dread. Just when they thought they might never find their way back, they stumbled upon an old, abandoned shack, hidden deep within the woods. The sight of it made their blood run cold. It was broken down, weathered by time, its windows dark and shattered. Yet there was something about it, something that made them feel drawn to it. Against their better judgment, they approached. The door creaked open with an unsettling groan. Inside, the air was musty, thick with the scent of decay. The floor was covered in dust, and remnants of what looked like old furniture lay scattered about. But it was the walls that caught their attention. Strange markings covered the wood, symbols they couldn't recognize. In the corner, a faded photograph hung crookedly on the wall. As Nathan stepped closer to inspect it, his stomach churned. The photo was of a young girl, pale, with dark hair. She looked eerily familiar, almost exactly like the figure they had seen on the beach. But she was smiling in the photograph, a wide, unsettling grin that sent shivers down his spine. The cold dread that had been creeping up on them exploded into full-blown terror. The shack was no longer a place of refuge. It felt like a trap, something meant to lure them in. The sense of being watched grew stronger. Every inch of the place seemed to pulse with a silent, unseen force, drawing them deeper into its grip. They had to leave. But as they turned to go, the door slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. Panic overtook the group as the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, locking them inside the decrepit shack. Nathan immediately rushed to the door, his heart pounding in his chest. He pulled on the rusted handle, but it wouldn't budge. The air inside felt thicker, colder, and each breath became harder to take. The windows were covered in grime, making it impossible to see anything outside. It was as if the shack had swallowed them whole, trapping them in a time and place that didn't feel real. Sam, usually calm and collected, was already pacing, muttering under his breath. Mark, his face pale, kept looking around as though expecting something to leap from the shadows. Julia, visibly shaken, stood near the back, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as though trying to hold her own sanity together. "What's going on? Why won't the door open?" Nathan's voice shook with fear. He turned toward the others, his eyes wild with desperation. "This is crazy. We need to get out." But no one could answer him. The shack felt alive in a way that made their skin crawl. Every creak of the wood sounded like whispers. Every movement felt like something unseen was watching them. The strange symbols on the walls now seemed to pulse with a dark energy, almost as if they were alive. As they stood there, unsure of what to do, a faint noise emerged from the corner of the room. It was low at first, like a soft scraping, followed by a slow, rhythmic tapping. Everyone froze, their eyes darting to the source of the sound. The tapping continued, coming from behind a wooden panel that looked as if it had been there for years. At first, they thought it might be an animal, a rat or something small. But the longer they listened, the more it sounded like something deliberate, something purposeful. Nathan stepped forward cautiously, his hand trembling as he reached for the panel. Mark, his voice barely above a whisper, warned him, "Don't. Whatever's behind there, we don't want to know." But Nathan couldn't stop himself. His curiosity pushed him forward, and with a quick jerk, he ripped the panel off the wall. What he saw made his blood run cold. Behind the panel was a small, dark room, barely big enough to fit a person. It looked like it had been hidden away for years. On the floor lay a single object, an old, cracked mirror. The glass was dark, clouded with age, but something in it seemed to shimmer faintly, as if something was alive inside. As Nathan reached for it, his fingers grazed the edge of the glass, and instantly, the temperature in the room dropped. A chill swept over him, and the once quiet shack seemed to come alive with strange, whispering voices. It was as though the walls themselves were breathing, suffocating them with an unseen presence. Sam grabbed Nathan's arm, pulling him away from the mirror. "We need to get out, now!" he shouted. The others backed toward the door, but as they reached it, the same rattling noise from before returned, this time louder, more forceful. The shack shook, as though something massive was trying to break in. The door shuddered under the pressure, and the temperature plummeted. As the air thickened with dread, a voice, low and unnatural, echoed through the room. It was a whisper at first, but it quickly grew into something much more menacing. "You should never have come," it said, its words sending waves of terror through their bodies. The voice wasn't human. It was something older, darker, something tied to the land they had trespassed upon. The group turned, panic in their eyes, but the door refused to open. The room seemed to close in on them, and in that moment, they realized the shack wasn't just a structure. It was a prison. They had walked into something ancient, something malevolent, and they might never walk out again. The air in the shack grew suffocating, thick with an energy that felt both oppressive and ancient. The group, now more desperate than ever, struggled to think clearly as the strange voice echoed around them, reverberating off the walls in a way that made their skin crawl. Their eyes darted from one corner of the room to another, every inch of the space feeling like it was closing in. The temperature had dropped to an unbearable chill, their breath visible in the air as if they were standing in the heart of winter. The once silent shack now seemed to hum with a low, ominous sound. Each passing moment felt like an eternity. The voice, distant at first, was now right beside them. "You've disturbed what was meant to remain hidden," it whispered, its tone harsh and almost mocking. The group huddled together in the center of the room, unable to escape the growing terror that gripped them. Nathan, his face pale with fear, looked frantically around for an exit, but there was none. Every direction they tried to move in only led them deeper into the suffocating atmosphere. Sam's eyes caught the glimmer of something in the corner of the room. It was faint, but it was there, an outline of something moving, just beyond their line of sight. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice shaking. No one responded. Everyone was too afraid to speak, too afraid to even look directly at whatever was lurking in the shadows. The whispers grew louder, now surrounding them, rising, and falling like the sound of wind through the trees. They couldn't pinpoint the source of the voice, but they could feel it, seeping into their minds, twisting their thoughts. The walls seemed to press in on them, their surfaces now shifting, as if the shack itself was alive. Every wooden beam seemed to pulse, and the floor beneath them felt unstable, like it might give way at any moment. And then, in the farthest corner of the room, a figure began to materialize. It appeared at first as a shadow, vague and blurry, but soon the outline of a girl became clear. The same girl from the beach. She stood motionless, her long dark hair falling over her face, her white dress billowing as if caught in a wind. That wasn't there. She didn't speak, but her presence was enough to send waves of terror through the group. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening now. "You should never have come here," the voice hissed again, the words coming from every direction at once. The girl slowly lifted her head, revealing her face. Her skin was pale, unnaturally so, and her eyes, those empty, hollow eyes, locked onto each of them, piercing into their souls. The group froze, unable to tear their gaze away from her. The air around them grew heavier, and the shadows seemed to swirl with dark energy, thickening as if to swallow them whole. Mark, his voice hoarse with fear, tried to speak, but no words came out. Instead, the room seemed to respond to his terror. The walls groaned as though in pain, the floor beneath them cracking. The girl stepped forward, her eyes never leaving theirs. "You've awakened something," she whispered, the words coming out as a cold, chilling breath. It was too late to run. The shack, once a mere shelter, had become a prison, one that held them in its grasp, and now they understood that they would never leave. The girl raised her hand, pointing at them, her fingers long and skeletal. "This is your fate now." The room seemed to close in on them, the whispers turning into screams, and the shadows swirling, pulling them toward the girl. They had disturbed something ancient, and there was no escaping the consequences of their actions. The shack had claimed them, and there was no way out. The room had become a suffocating nightmare. The walls seemed to close in tighter with every breath, pressing in on the group, forcing them to stand frozen, unable to move. The figure of the girl in the corner grew more defined with each passing second, her hollow eyes locked onto theirs. The air had turned heavy with the weight of something ancient, something dark, and the whispers, now loud and menacing, filled the shack with an eerie, unsettling sound. The shadows on the walls seemed to stretch and twist, coming to life, crawling across the room like sinister tendrils reaching for them. Nathan's heart hammered in his chest, and every part of him screamed to run, but his legs refused to obey. Fear had gripped him so tightly that even his mind felt paralyzed. He glanced at the others, their faces pale with terror, their eyes wide with panic, but no one moved. The girl took a step forward, her body swaying unnaturally, as if floating above the ground. Her white dress billowed around her like a ghostly fog, and the darkness seemed to cling to her form, as though she herself was made of shadows. Her cold, lifeless eyes never left them, and her lips parted to speak. "It's too late now," she whispered, her voice a soft hiss that sent chills through their bones. The shack seemed to groan under the weight of her words. "You should never have come. You've awoken something that has waited for so long." The room felt colder still, and a strange pressure pressed down on their chests, making it harder to breathe. It was as though the very air itself had turned against them. Mark tried to speak, but his throat was dry, his voice barely a whisper. What? What do you want from us? The girl's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a smile of kindness. It was a smile of something darker, something twisted. She raised her hand slowly, pointing at them, her fingers long and thin, like brittle branches of an old tree. "You've already given me what I wanted," she said, her voice echoing in their minds. "Your fear, your suffering, your souls. They are mine now." The walls seemed to ripple, as though the very structure of the shack was alive, reacting to her words. The shadows around them grew deeper, and the floor beneath their feet began to tremble. Sam, his voice trembling, whispered, "We're trapped. We're not getting out." And he was right. The door, which had once been their only hope of escape, was now gone. The walls of the shack had closed in completely, sealing them inside with no way out. The floor beneath them seemed to shift, as though the house itself was changing, becoming something otherworldly. The girl's eyes gleamed with a dark satisfaction as she watched their growing panic. "You will never leave," she said, her voice chilling and final. "This place is mine now, and so are you." As she spoke, the shadows moved in around them, their forms twisting and bending unnaturally. The group screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the dark, the room now vibrating, with a dark, oppressive force. Nathan felt a sharp pain in his chest, as though something inside him was being ripped apart. The others were in the same agony, their faces contorted in pain, but no matter how hard they struggled, it was as if the very shack was draining them of their life. Their bodies grew cold, their vision blurred, and the room seemed to distort around them. They were no longer in control of their own bodies. The last thing Nathan saw before everything went dark was the girl's face, smiling cruelly as the shadows swallowed him whole. The shack had claimed them, and they were never going to leave.